Well, again, welcome everyone to the Center for Advocacy and Social Justice at the Jacksonville Urban League. We're very pleased to bring you our second in a series of engagement circles. We've actually done, this will be a total of 8 for the year, but the center took it over last time to really take an approach that would engage with officers who are out there in the community, who are on the front line, and get their feedback on expressions of interest in change. And we had a great session the last time, and I'm looking forward to one this time. And I want to make it clear that our focus is on these officers who are serving the community and getting their information, their feedback on what is happening from their perspective. And in particular, this particular meeting, we'll focus on a paper that's been developed by the Urban League that distills a couple of reports, one from the Safer Together program, one from one that was developed through a professor at Bethune-Cookman, Randy Nelson. And those were distilled. We've taken feedback from our last engagement meeting. That'll be incorporated, bringing in law enforcement perspective. And then today we'll be using their responses today to also bring into that paper. But I'm going to turn it over to Jamie Krasnogor.
Oh, hello.
Yes. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie Krasnogor, who will be taking us through a slide deck as part of our program and begin us with introductions. So, Jamie?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jamie Krasnogor, and the kind of agenda for today is we're going to meet some of the officers, and our Lieutenant Robert Lestrange is going to go through some JSO highlights, and then I'll take us through a report overview, and then we'll open up the floor to some Q&A and then closing. So at this time, any officers who are joining us today, if you guys could just unmute yourselves and then introduce yourselves.
Hey, I'm Officer Tyler Kunka.
Tyler, would you mention your name again, please?
My name is Tyler Kunka, K-U-N-K-A.
Thank you. And then I think Ryan Rogers, you were trying to introduce.
Yep. My name is Ryan. My name is Ryan Rogers. I currently work in Zone 2 on Blue Squad.
Thank you. And Officer Carol Reed. He may have pressed the wrong button. Lieutenant Lestrange, introduce yourself, please.
Hello, Lieutenant Robert Lestrange, Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. 19 years today. Today's my birthday, my anniversary day. Appreciate you all being here and look forward to a great meeting. I'll be with you in a minute.
All right. Other officers that we have on?
Officer Chutuk with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, 4.5 years now, Zone 3, Golf 1.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
I'm Officer Travis Ferrari. I work in Zone 5. Been here about 2.5 years now.
Great, thank you. And Officer Reed, we lost you there for a second. Can you hear me? There we go. Would you care to introduce yourself, Officer Reed? We can't hear you. Maybe your mic is off or you've got a bad connection. All right. Any other JSO representatives? Okay. Jamie?
So now I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Lestrange to just give us some JSO highlights.
Well, good evening again. Thanks y'all for being here. I appreciate it. Once again, my name is Lieutenant Robert Lestrange, Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. I work in the Community Engagement Division. I've got 19 years on the JSO, approximately 15 to 16 of those in patrol as an officer and a supervisor. I've worked on the west side, the north side, Zone 1, Zone 3. I've been a lieutenant in Zone 1, Zone 3. I've worked in investigations, Homeland Security, and for about 2 years, and I've been with community engagement for about 9 months now. So the highlights of what I do and what we do and what we call our community engagement division is we focus a lot of programs on the youth and the citizens. We have a Citizens Academy. We have a Teen Police Academy. We work with the police explorers. We run crime prevention seminars, like officer-friendly type things. I also have the Jacksonville Police Athletic League, which encourages relationships between police officers in athletics and education. I also have a blight unit, which scans the city for homeless camps and, should we say, properties that are in bad shape that need repair. What else do we do? I have a couple other divisions, but in general, that's what we do. And most of the focus is obviously it's not on the beat officers. My officers work kind of behind the scenes, but we do a lot of education. And like I said, we do focus on the youth, and you know, we work with special schools for special children. You know, we do fundraisers for them. We do functions with them. We also do CRAZE training, which is active shooter training for businesses and schools and organizations. So it's a great job. I've learned a lot. I get to meet a lot of people. I wear a uniform every day because I do meet a lot of people, and I think it's important for them to see the uniform. I meet a lot of community members. I meet a lot of business members. And for these young officers out there, I know you're probably thinking, you know, I've never even heard of this guy. Where does he work? Well, that's what we do. I was on the street for a very long time, and I love patrol work. It was outstanding. Sometimes it was scary. Was it dangerous? Sometimes, yes. But I met a lot of good people, and I got to help a lot of people. So just hang in there, continue your careers. Don't get discouraged. The days are long, and especially now the days are longer and hot. But don't get too discouraged. Just keep at it. That's what I would tell you, because, you know, several years later, you can be in my position. So I'm looking at the tail end of my career. There's still a lot of things hopefully to do, but if anybody has any direct questions for me right away, that's about all I have for highlights, unless you want me to talk some more.
All right. Thank you, Lieutenant Lestrange. Now we're going to go into the interactive report overview. So again, this overview is just a review of one of the reports that a former intern has written. And the report overview introduces what beyond policing is, why we should look at beyond policing, police communal relations, and what is currently being done and how we can move forward. If you're interested in getting a copy of the report, just feel free to private message Sophia Berger or email the CASJ intern coordinator at jaxul.org email. And then as we go through, at any point, just feel free to post questions in the chat. I'm not a professional, but our officers joining us hopefully can answer them.
Voices of a Nation. Social justice movements in the last few years have been fueled by police interactions with the community, specifically communities of color. News4Jax reporter Marilyn Parker shows us how the history of the relationship with law enforcement impacts communities today.
Tension has grown between police and communities of color. Jacksonville historian and civil rights activist Rodney Hurst says what's been televised is barely scratching the surface to what police relations were like, dating as far back as the 1700s.
The Second Amendment dealt with slave patrols and police departments not only in Jacksonville, especially throughout the South. I mean, Bull Connor, Jim Clark, Willis McCall, they were the epitome of racist law enforcement officials.
Today, calls for justice and police reform stems from police killings and excessive force used in Black communities.
We have been faced with that kind of police and law enforcement racism since the beginning of this country. Until they admit that and understand that there is room for conversation, we're going to continue to have these confrontations.
In a 2020 Jacksonville survey from the Public Opinion Research Laboratory at UNF, 97% of Black people and 63% of white people somewhat or strongly disagree that Black people and white people receive equal treatment from the police. In a statement from the Jacksonville Fraternal Order of Police, quote, "Our members work tirelessly every day throughout Jacksonville to build the goodwill that currently exists between the police and every neighborhood in Jacksonville."
In the face of police violence, people across the country are calling for drastic changes to policing and shifting responsibilities and resources away from law enforcement. The calls for change might make you wonder, won't that make us less safe? Safety isn't just about police. The justice system can respond to crime, but it can't fix the systemic issues that cause crime: poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Even officers themselves agree that's an unrealistic thing to ask.
We're asking cops to do too much in this country. And I just ask for other parts of our democracy, along with the free press, to help us and not put that burden all on law enforcement.
Right now, we're relying too much on the justice system. If we want to prevent crime, we need to invest in strong economies, good schools, affordable housing, and accessible healthcare. And when people are on a risky path, we need to step in early and offer them the opportunities they need to get back on track. If we intervene early, we can help them stay away from the justice system in the first place. None of this is a radical idea. In fact, the medical field has known about it for decades. Medicine used to rely heavily on major surgeries. If you had heart disease, surgery was your only option. You were in for a lengthy hospital stay, risky side effects, and lifelong scars. But nowadays, science shows that prevention and early interventions can play a big role in keeping us healthy. We know that diet and exercise can prevent avoidable illnesses. Our doctors can recommend medications or lifestyle changes that keep us from getting really sick. Major surgeries are still an option, but only if less invasive treatments aren't enough.
The case for focusing more of the nation's attention and resources on prevention is more than a theory. It's a reality that's grounded in science and experience.
We need to start treating the justice system like open heart surgery. It should be our last resort, not our go-to solution. When we invest in healthy communities, we can strengthen public safety without the harmful side effects of arrest and incarceration. It's time to get to the root of the injustice in our country. Share this video if you think it's time for public safety to catch up to modern medicine. In the face of police violence, people across the country are calling for.
Well, I think some great discussion has happened in those breakout rooms at this time. If we could just get those officers from each of the breakout rooms to give a little summary of any insights that you might have learned from your discussion. I just think we should go around. We can start with Officer Kunka because I was in his breakout room.
So in our discussion, we had some time to kind of talk about specifically related to race and how, there's kind of a disparity between law enforcement and the Black community and how it's been a long-running issue. And we were just getting into the last part of that here, and we kind of got cut off. So just to kind of finish what we were talking about was basically, it's tough on the individual level. There's all we can do is be responsible for ourselves and treat people impartially and fairly. But that being said, I think as individual officers, we are still responsible for trying to bridge that gap, even though we're not going to be able to solve it on our own. I think by signing up for this job and interacting with the community, we are responsible to try to bridge that gap and fix the issue.
Thank you. Officer Reed?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so pretty much piggybacking off what Officer Conker said, we pretty much had the same discussion in our breakout group. Just pretty much saying how officers can be more involved in like Black communities and how Black officers are, how they're perceived in the Black community and how white officers are perceived in the Black community. So we had a pretty good discussion about that. We did get cut off due to time, but like I was telling Mr. George, if that's his name, correct me if I'm wrong, that I just feel like it just takes time, and then we can just be like the best officer we can be while out in our community. So people will have a better outlook, not just on a Black officer, but on all officers with community engaging in their community.
Perfect. Let's see. Officer Kudek, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, I was in the same group with Lieutenant Robert Strange, and we talked about mostly about the same thing, policing within communities and traffic stops on vehicles. And we had a long conversation about not knowing who's operating the motor vehicle most of the time when we do conduct traffic stops. And if your tag light is out, we have an obligation to conduct the traffic stop so that way we can enforce rules of the road and be the police and try to prevent other safety issues happening, such as traffic crashes and sort. So.
Awesome. And then Officer Rogers.
Just to piggyback off the other officers, we talk about the race and the separation between officers and the Black people, and we were just talking about how we could better interact with each other. Like I was explaining to them, one of my big things is interacting with the youth, trying to get the youth to understand that we aren't there just to get people in trouble. We're there to help out in any way that we can, and helping them understand so that maybe by us interacting with them, their parents will see like, oh, they're not here just to put people in jail or place people in the back of their cars. They're actually here to help the community rather than be against the community.
All right. So now I'm just going to kind of recap some of the problem that was detailed in the report. So the police force has grown by 36% in the past 20 years nationwide, further expanding its role in the community. Today, the police force is not only enforcing the law, but also treating overdoses, de-escalating behavioral health crises, addressing homelessness, and much more. Collectively, the police make more than 10 million arrests each year, and less than 5% are for serious violent crimes. The modern police force is taking on more responsibility with their local communities. However, some lack the social investment to listen to their community's concerns, especially for communities of color. The increased concentration of police officers in Black communities due to the high call volume has posed a problem because these communities are often subject to over-policing and aggressive enforcement tactics. Statistics show that Black men are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by an officer than their white counterparts. On average, 1 in every 1,000 Black males dies at the hands of an officer. Due to the rise of social media, there are more recorded and shared instances of police violence against Black individuals. Consequently, frustration arises when officers are not held responsible for their misconduct, and the police department follows up by releasing a statement that the community perceives to be defensive. For decades, these communities have called for alternative solutions to promote public safety by opening the conversation for police reform. Thus, a conversation surrounding beyond policing has arisen. So beyond policing addresses public safety issues through community engagement programs, and community engagement programs are responsible for reviewing and evaluating citizens' complaints, inspecting the practices and policies of police departments, making recommendations for oversight functions, and much more. They are created with the purpose of preventing crime while eliminating the atmosphere of fear associated with policing. These programs enable law enforcement to understand the needs of the community and factors that contribute to crime. Through these programs, community residents, religious leaders, nonprofits, service providers, and law enforcement officials establish a collaborative partnership where they apply alternative problem-solving techniques to resolve issues that affect the community. According to the Center for American Progress, a community engagement program must be within the jurisdiction's government structure, create a permanent pathway for community residents to participate in the development of a public safety agenda, and provide the community residents with direct control over the budgets and investments in community needs. So one of the most important aspects of police officers' role is building and maintaining a positive relationship within the community that they serve. So as mentioned earlier, there has been a growing push to address these relationships because of the recent current events that have damaged the trust between communities and officers that serve them. And Jacksonville has not been immune to these changes. So a number of national and local events have tainted the view of law enforcement agencies, highlighting the need to work with the local community to address the concerns that they have to move forward and reestablish trust. We will be addressing the concerns that the Jacksonville community have regarding the JSO to create an open dialogue between police officers and community members in the hopes of rebuilding their relationship and creating an environment where trust can once again be fostered. So in order to address the concerns of the communities regarding public safety and the role of the JSO, we must look at how the community perceives the JSO and the officers within it. Historically, both majority and minority communities have not always had the most positive views of law enforcement for different reasons. To get to the root of these opinions, Dr. Tammy Hodo and Dr. Brian Van Brunt conducted a series of community workshops with the JSO and Jacksonville community to understand community views of the JSO. This table shows a breakdown by race and reason of why community members view the JSO in a negative light. Among these reasons are an unfriendly and rude demeanor, racial profiling, a lack of action, and judgmental attitudes. However, there is a clear divide between the races about what the main concerns are, but a rude and unfriendly demeanor is cited as the most concerning issue across all races. For Black and Hispanic respondents, their second most concern is racial profiling, but for white respondents, it's unprofessionalism. This highlights a clear divide between the groups in the community and the JSO. So we want to get to know what your opinions are potentially about why, what might be your reasons for not trusting the police officers. So if you could go to slido.com and type in this code, or you can scan the QR code, and then I'll activate the question. So scan the QR code. All right, maybe they can join in the next activity. So I'm gonna go ahead and click and see what the responses are. So the number one reason among this group for perceptions of law enforcement distrust would be inflated sense of power and authority. And then the least ranked response would be lack of actions or don't do their job. So from this, I would say that police mistrust among this group is more from a sense of power and authority, but there is the perceptions that overall that police officers do their job. And then Lieutenant Lestrange, would you like to comment on these results?
I don't know if I have a comment. I would just have a question. What do people mean by inflated sense of power and authority?
Does anybody?
I would be happy to answer that.
I think because we do our jobs, I guess we just do it with an inflated sense of power and authority.
I believe an inflated sense of power because they've got the power.
That's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons.
Well, that was my reason.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. Yes, but we have a history of racism because the numbers keep showing for over almost 400 years. One race has been disenfranchised. So that's what we're trying to do here because we should know the numbers. Most of us should know the numbers, and we should know what the problems are. Why are we going over the same thing again? That's my question.
I like to say that I haven't had experience with police in Jacksonville. I've been here for 3 years, but I did get stopped by police once, and it was about a traffic violation. And my experience was that the police officer didn't want to listen to me. The police officer was prejudging, and so that really upset me. That it's almost, I guess it is kind of like you're guilty before you assume guilty, and there's no chance for you to have an explanation. That was that one experience that I had that really upset me. I ended up paying for a ticket, not because I thought it was just, but because I simply didn't have time to go downtown and, you know, sit in court, and I just didn't have time. I figured it was easier to lose part with $200, but I felt that I had a defense, but I couldn't get it out because the assumption was that I was guilty. So that to me is an abuse of power.
If you don't mind me asking, what was your traffic citation for?
They said I went through a crosswalk. And I disagree that I went through a crosswalk. And the other factor was that I have a dog that is very overreactive, and she was in the back seat barking her head off, and I couldn't hear the police officer, and he wasn't going to let me get out of the car, but finally to talk to him, but finally he did let me get out of the car, because even he finally realized that this dog was not going to shut up and we wouldn't be able to have a conversation. But another issue is that this is in the city of Cleveland, which is a very poor city. And there are areas set up where, you know, they ticket people because they need to put money in the city coffers. So that was another, I mean, I didn't bring that up then, but everybody knows it. So that did feel like an abuse of power. I mean, at least like,
how we rolling for the sake of moving forward.
I'm sorry, what was that?
They're trying to find who we are here, but I mean, is everybody, if anybody read the newspaper, and I hope people on this call is reading the newspaper, because if you're not reading the newspaper, you shouldn't be in this room. Now, I mean, my main point here, we know what the problem is. What are we going to do about it? Because I'm in meetings all the time dealing with this issue with JSO and other entities in Jacksonville. We have the same systemic problems in Jacksonville. What are we going to do about it? And going to JSO, they can't answer. I don't know why we keep, in closing, I like to say this, why do we have to buy into the police? Why the police not buying into the citizens? That's who they work for, the citizens, not us working for them. And I keep hearing you saying as if JSO.
We lost you
I don't know if he cut out, but Ombudsman Thomas, would you like to unmute yourself? Do you have a comment?
Evening. My name is Abdul Hai, so humbly requesting that you call me Abdul Hai. So there's a lot to unpack, there's a lot to say, so I'm going to try to do it as strategically and as concisely as I can. I don't know if anyone else feels kind of the climate of this meeting, but we are continuing to rehash what we've heard for the past 8 years, or what some people, you know, what others will consider 400 years. And we're holding these officers accountable for something that they may or may not have done, right? That's my first point. My next point is we've created, this meeting is very, very polarizing, right? It's almost like the officers are walking into an ambush. That's how I feel about it. And I'm not saying that I'm defending them. I'm just saying That's the feel of it. That they're made to defend different incidences and so on and so forth. I agree with Stanley in the regard, what are we going to do next? That's my concern also. So we have a lot of conversations about what has happened. We know what's happened. What is our next step? What are we going to do? So I went to the sheriff's meeting for the special election a couple nights ago. And when I talked to a couple of the candidates, they said, we need to hold officers accountable. I asked, what does that look like? What does that mean, hold them accountable? Are they going to receive punishment? Are they going to receive jail? Are they going to be stripped of their badge and gun, so on and so forth? No one was able to answer that question. My recommendation is we take more of a restorative justice approach, right? Because the way the perception is the way that not many, but some officers handle business, they come from a criminal justice perspective. And that criminal justice perspective can be seen in the same way that teachers treat students, or that SROs treat students, or that doctors treat their patients. It's a very, punitive approach. However, we can't do the same thing back, right? So we can't take that same criminal justice perspective as citizens and look to burn officers at the stake. With restorative justice, you have to repair a harm. So if a harm is committed, it is a responsibility of the offender to repair that harm. So how are we going to repair harms if we go after the livelihood of citizens or we go after the livelihood of police officers? That is a concern here, because I feel the climate of this meeting is everybody's in a criminal justice perspective, the criminal justice lens of, you did a harm to me, I want your accountability to be consequences. I think we're playing a very dangerous game here, because it's not going to do anything but further polarize everybody, and we're just going to continue to entrench in our extreme views, or our moderate views can turn extreme by continuing to entrench in them. So my recommendation is, and I'm speaking as a child and youth ombudsperson at the Center for Children's Rights, we have restorative justice approaches, strategies, trainings that we would love to help facilitate. Not just, you're a white police officer, or you're a black man who's an officer, but you're a coon, all this stuff that you hear. I'm just saying, let's get in a space where we can truly build community. And the way that you build community is through storytelling and reflection, right? I understand what we're trying to do here with JUL, but this is not a context or a space where we're telling stories and we're reflecting. We're indicting. One group is indicting, one group is defending. And then it comes back, that group that was defending is now indicting, and now we're defending. That's not going to get us anywhere. So my humble recommendation is that you lean into what CCR, Center for Children's Rights, is doing, and allow us to create some spaces for officers, community members, offenders, and those who have been recipients of the offense to sit down together and tell a story, tell stories about themselves, and truly build community. I understand the intent of this, but this is not building community. I don't know if anybody else feels that, but that's how I feel. So I could go on for another hour and a half, but I'm gonna cut my time. Lieutenant Lestrange, I have your email. I'm gonna reach out to you and offer some services, and hopefully we can collaborate here in the future to do some real work, to do some real healing and reflection.
Thank you, Abdul Hai. I think it's important to realize that these two circles we've had is really the first time we've had officers from the line, who work out in the community, have a chance to respond to these issues. We had the City Council Safer Together program. We have a report from Randy Nelson, who worked right in with the JSO and had recommendations. So we wanted to make sure that the officers had a chance to, reflect, as you put it, on some of these concepts. And I think we have gathered some important insights from them, as we did at our last meeting. I realize that it can easily percolate into or be seen as a polarizing situation. But I'd like you to see it as a real chance for us to listen, and particularly in our breakout rooms, listen to each other about how people feel, and exchange those feelings. I do think it's a great idea. As you know, I'm very familiar with the Center for Children's Rights, having started it myself and sitting on the board. So I hear you, and I think it's great. I think we'd be happy to work with you, Abdul Hai, on that project with Lieutenant Lestrange and anybody else at the JSO. I think it's a great idea. After all, you have so much in common with what the JSO's mission is, which is to eliminate crime and keep people happy. I mean, that's their mission, So I hope we can get the best out of this as we go forward. And please continue to comment and interject when you think it's helpful. I think I have a hand raised from Mr. Maxey.
Yes, how you doing? I appreciate the comments that were done by Brother Thomas. And I think that one of the things that we have to make sure that we work away from is that is not one solution to the problem, is multi-layered, and more importantly, that the situation that we deal with police is not just interwoven in the fabric of policing, but it's interwoven in the fabric of society as a whole. And I think sometimes when we take the time to look at post-traumatic slave syndrome, some of the issues that date back to slavery is what manifests itself today, but it has never been any true research done into that, because we always say, get over it. And that's not something you can get over, because now it's become historical and genetic to a certain extent. But again, I agree that this is a necessary step, and this is not the end all, but actually just the beginning of something even bigger and better. I now work with Operation Save Our Sons with Dr. John Eric Guns, and we do a program called Bridging the Gap with Dr. Randy Nelson out of Bethune-Cookman, and we work with the students from Ed White High School over the last 3 years, and we've seen some positive results, even to the point where we have these young men who now want to maybe become JSO officers in the near future. And I think that's some of the things that we need to start talking about. What does it look like in creating an environment where it becomes a pipeline? I remember in our breakout group, the question I asked is that Jacksonville is at least 25% or greater African American, but that's not a true reflection in our force. It's less than 10% African American. And we know how important it is to have individuals of the same ethnic group patrolling their neighborhoods and building those relationships and being from that neighborhood, actually. So, I mean, I think that we got to start looking at what are some systems that are being in place to create level of change, and not saying that that is the fix. That's one of the fixes in regards to making sure people are being properly reflected within the police force to create that level of change that we want to see. But if I don't see that, if these young people don't see it as a proper career, all they will always be is victims, and they're not victims. They're actually change agents, that we have to receive them as such. But we got to stop with certain rules, right? You got to have a certain credit score. You have to have a certain degree. I mean, come on. I mean, let's try to work with individuals to properly recruit them and make them part of the force. So again, I just wanted to share that. But again, this is a step, but this cannot be the only step. And we do have a long way to go in creating a level of change. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie, where are you in your process?
I think the process has evolved, if anything. I mean, if we're listening to what Abdul Hai had brought up, while this was intentionally just to review the report and the points that were made in the report, I feel like some of the community members and individuals obviously are experiencing this, so they don't need as much background as was initially intended. So I would say I can share per the report what the ideas were for the going forward and then what has currently been done, but I don't really know if that's necessary if we want to change the space into just brainstorming about future policy and go actions to move forward.
That makes some sense. To maybe looks like Stanley is trying to speak. Stanley?
Yes, absolutely. Well, my main concern here, every time we have these conversations, and I'm involved in a few of them at the table, my main point is when we talk about the JSO and community, we always put JSO first. You understand? I want you to think about what I'm saying. It should be the community and JSO. You make it seem like JSO is a entity, a law enforcement entity. But the point of what I'm saying is, if you look at it, is that if the JSO, and nothing against JSO, is more important than the community or the people. That's one of the things that you should change first, the narrative. Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to call on Father Ivan. If you wouldn't mind giving your perspective from the patient's perspective, that would be great.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the police officers. I like this because I don't feel we are trying to indict or to blame the police officers, but I think we are trying to build a community. I don't know the history so much, but based on what I am saying, I have seen so far in Jacksonville and in St. Augustine, this is one of those programs that can enhance good relationship between the community and the police officers. But it is rather a pity that just a handful of people are participating in this conversation. There are so many people who should participate, leaders in community church, principals of high schools, but they are not here. During the breakout room, the leader of our group indicated some of the programs that the police officers are involved in making sure that there is a good relationship with the community. For example, they send out officers to churches in the areas that they are working to speak, to work directly with the pastors and the community. And they do that very, very well. I think that is one of the strategies for the police officers to enhance their relationship with the community. So I have known so many police officers, even police chief or leaders in the police force, both in Jacksonville and in St. Augustine. I don't feel that they don't do anything. I always feel friendly with them. I see them on the street. We greet one another. I see them in the church. We greet one another. We have conversation with one another. But then, I remain grateful to what they have done. You know, sometimes they are at the receiving end, sometimes, when they fall victims to, what they shouldn't fall victims to. That does not mean that we shouldn't have this conversation. So I have good impression about this conversation, and I have learned a lot already. I hope it will continue. It helps the police officers, it helps community leaders, even though many of them are not here. I wish this can be continued in a more robust way, especially working with the pastors, working with the principals of schools, working with community leaders to reach the grassroots. That is one way we can make this conversation and our relationship better. Even though I am an outsider, I have learned a lot. I have seen a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Father. And I noticed, Jamie, you have a slide up now that actually addresses what is currently happening. So did you want to speak to those, or?
I can. So just the Mayor's Community-Based Crime Reduction Center, their goal is to reduce crime, increase mutual trust between law enforcement and community stakeholders. And then the iCare Civil Citation Program was initially launched as a youth civil citation program. And because of the great progress and growth that it had, in 2019 by decreasing juvenile arrests by 76% and increasing the number of juveniles who did not reoffend to 94%. They have an adult civil citation program to reduce the amount of jail overcrowding and keeping low-level offenders out of the system. And then there's the co-responder program that's a mental health initiative that partners licensed mental health professionals with officers to respond to mental health crises. And with the implementation of 988, this is just a stepping stone to incorporate the collaboration between mental health response and police response. And the mental health offender program is aimed at reducing the cycle of homelessness and police or jail, getting homeless people out of jail and back reintegrated into the society.
Yeah, on the iCare initiative, it does seem to be a little, how can I put it? A lot of people were very disappointed when the sheriff refused to speak to iCare about using that civil citation approach to minor infractions. When you get arrested, you lose a job, and for something simple. So there were a lot of people that were disappointed in that. So I'm assuming that dialogue will continue with a new sheriff and new candidates, and I hope, in fact, when you think about it as a group, regardless of how you feel on any particular one issue, we have an opportunity with a new sheriff election coming to have an impact. So that's a good thing to have. Were you going to have an additional breakout room, Jamie, or what were your next steps?
I believe that Jolita Wainwright has her hand raised.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I wanted to ask was a question about the slide that was up. I remember when it was suggested that the officers were trained to identify people who may have some mental health issues. But now I see you have a mental health person that works with the police. So the police were not trained. Is that the way it went?
Lieutenant Lestrange, maybe you could respond to that.
Yeah, we started a co-responder program, we call it, where not only we have officers who are dedicated to respond to calls involving mentally ill individuals, but they also have civilians out there with them riding along. Not all of them all of the time, but they do have civilian mental health counselors. I think the general public probably doesn't realize that the police, I can remember, it wasn't so long ago, we spent a lot of time interacting with mentally ill individuals, a lot more than you would think. And quite often they can be very dangerous, and it can be very dangerous situations. So I think that program is outstanding. I think I've heard lots of great things about it out on the street, because certainly, you've got to handle individuals who might be in a certain frame of mind or just have some kind of mental illness issue, in a delicate manner sometimes. So that's what I can speak to about that program. It's a great program, and it's going to continue. I think we're committed to it as an agency.
Thank you.
Miss Franklin has her hand raised.
Yes, hello. Thank you for taking my question. I have a question because I noticed since the law changed about the homeless population, I'm from Brooklyn, and we have a lot of transient people. And so I want to know how those calls are triaged, meaning are they coming in through 911, or are the officers just coming upon a person? And if they are, how do they make the decision that they need to call for a mental health evaluation?
Well, I can speak to that as well. It happens both ways. Sometimes somebody will call in, it could be a homeless person, it could be their neighbor, it could be their family member who they believe is suffering some kind of mental illness episode. Or a police officer might encounter somebody out on the street. I mean, clearly, if you see someone wandering around naked or screaming at the top of their lungs at 2:00 in the afternoon, walking down the middle of the street, that might be somebody that you might have to interact with. If that makes any sense.
Okay, it does, but I guess my bigger question is, if the officer is not trained in dealing with mental health, I see a lot of the homeless population who have the underlying mental health component. How do the officer that comes on the scene, how do they know the difference? I witnessed today an episode. I didn't stay to see him follow through, but clearly the person had some underlying mental health issues. I personally have a lady that lives in my neighborhood under a tree. She refuses to go inside of a home, and her family visits her and brings her food there. So my question is, for those officers, if they're not trained, they come on the scene, how are they going to treat those individuals, and how will they know the difference?
Well, we're all trained. All officers have mental illness training that we go through, actually a couple of times a year. And here's the question to you. You're absolutely right. How do you make somebody who doesn't want to go into their home and wants to live under a tree, how do you make them go into their home if they don't want to?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been trying to get this lady to go in a house for 2 years. She's not going to. She's been through Schatzbacher. She knows about the Schatzbacher mental health component, where they come out and they medicate them. She's afraid of being medicated. And her sister, who's obviously her payee from Social Security, agrees with her. And so I know that there are people who are not going to go in. That was not my question. My question is, how is JSO going to treat her if they encounter her and she has a ton of her buggy and her things that she carries around. And if she moves, she takes it with her. But underlying is mental health, and all her family members had a mental health diagnosis. So we know this lady personally. So I want to know, how is JSO going to treat her, and how do they know the difference? And I want to make sure that she isn't harmed, because a lot of these homeless people, they do have the underlying mental health. They may or may not have a diagnosis, and they may just be, cycling through the system.
Well, are you aware of something called a Baker Act?
I am.
Okay. I don't want to use up too much of the forum's time, but maybe you could send me an email, or we could talk about it offline a little more.
Okay, can you drop your email address in the chat for me, please?
Yes, ma'am, I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do want to bring everybody's attention to so I can remember, I'm old enough to remember when you wanted to call the police, you might have to get the phone book out and look down a long list of numbers and figure out which one to call. By that time, you're dead, or somebody's, the time to get them to the hospital is gone because you spent all this time. So they invented 911. It's like a miracle. You dial that number anywhere you are, and you get access to the police, and they're ready to help. And most of us, I think, are taught not to mess with it unless it's a serious situation. Well, now they're coming out with, what is it, 988, Jamie?
Yes, 988.
And that number is going to be intended for mental health situations, people exhibiting behavior. And so instead of calling 911, you end up calling 988 so that the people answering that call can, they're trained and better equipped, let's say, to respond. And I suspect that that's going to help. It will take some time, but I think it's going to help law enforcement and public safety approaches for cities in a way not quite as dramatic as 911 has done, but I think it's going to have a significant impact. And I know one reason I know it's true is because some states aren't sure, and that includes Florida, what they're going to do with it, how they're going to handle it. And but I think it will be very helpful, not only to the law enforcement, but certainly to the individuals involved. I know my brother suffers from schizophrenia, and he lives in California, where it's very difficult to make anybody do anything if they don't want to do it. And luckily now he's at home and doing all right, but there have been times when he was on the street and it was very difficult to deal with it. So so anyway, I think that's going to be have a major impact on policing and on our communities. So other directions, Jamie, that you're seeing that we should talk about?
May I ask one quick question, Jamie?
Yes.
Of the officers, how do you feel? Do you feel that the Blue Shield still exists, where officers don't feel inclined to tell on other officers when they have bad behavior, when they see incidents happen? Do you feel that that still exists in JSO in Jacksonville? And if it does exist, what are some of the things that are happening on the JSO side to get rid of that Blue Shield?
Lieutenant Lestrange, are you there? Looks like, oh, there you are.
Sorry, I didn't realize that I was muted there. What are we doing to get rid of the Blue Shield? Was that the question?
Yeah, in other words, they're what we call circle the wagons. You know, when when somebody is obviously not behaving their way they should be, instead of speaking to them and telling them that they should be not doing what they're doing, we tend to ignore it, or we get very defensive when others complain.
Well, you know, like I said, I'm celebrating my 19th police officer birthday today. And maybe my experiences aren't normal, but from what I've seen with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, if you are truly not doing what you're supposed to be doing, you will be either reprimanded, suspended, fired, reassigned. So I can speak to it on that level. I understand the perception that we do have to fight for each other in our profession, and there is a certain amount of protection that we have to have towards each other, because my life might depend on the man or woman in the car next to me. But as far as officers not behaving the way they should be, I think the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office does a really good job of handling that. I don't think it's as clandestine as the public believes it is. I think that's more a perception than a reality, at least from what I've experienced in the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office.
And sir, you notice because the surveys have been done anonymously amongst the officers to make sure that doesn't happen, or is that just based off your personal opinion?
I didn't say it was an opinion, sir. I said it was my experience.
No, well, I'm asking, how do you know that to be true? Is that a data-driven answer that you're saying it is not as clandestine, or is it just something that is you feel that way over your 19 years of experience?
No, sure. That's not based on my feelings. That's based on my experience and the data. I think if you went back, at least during the tenure of Mike Williams, and were able to research how many officers did receive reprimands or suspensions or got terminated because of bad behavior, I think you'd be surprised. It's more than you probably would think.
No, I'm not surprised by that. I mean, you publish your data. It's not something that's hidden. It's published, sir. But what the question I'm asking you is, have you anonymous survey the officers that work for JSO to make sure that it is not a problem? Because it's going to be hard for another officer to say, yeah, that's a problem, and you still work for the force. So is there anonymous surveys given based off of that to see whether it is a problem?
I don't think it's a problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you. No, that's fine. I mean, okay, you're the expert.
Ms. Jolita, just one more question about the mental health training. Lieutenant Lestrange, you said that mental health, you all have been receiving mental health training for several years, but I know that in the last year or two, ICARE has pushed for the officers to be trained, especially by Miami police officers who were able to decrease the number of mental health patients that had been incarcerated. And it was my understanding that that training was not done. So what kind of training were you referring to when you said that the officers have received training?
Well, the officers and the young officers that are on this panel know that in the academy, they have to receive, I think it's more than 40 hours, it might be 80 hours of crisis intervention training. And we have to basically recertify in that every year. So, and I'm not trying to be on the defensive here, but police officers, we are asked to do a lot of different things. And, being mental health counselors is not something that we necessarily should be. We should be aware of it, and we should be able to deal with problems as we come across them.
Yeah, but it was an issue. Yeah, it was an issue that ICARE brought up about the training. So I was wondering.
Yeah, I don't know about the ICARE.
Okay, because we were looking for some experts that were in the police departments in successful cities like Miami, to come here and train, not the training to be done internally, by local people. So I was just wondering what you were referring to the training. So I understand now. No problem.
Well, it sounds like one of the takeaways is to find out more about mental health training and what iCare was asking for, and how we can work together to develop approaches to that problem, particularly in light of the fact that 988 is coming, and what the city's response is going to be, and what kind of support we'll get at the state level. Other areas that we ought to talk in this dialogue, that we're so fortunate to be able to speak together with our officers. Other concerns? How about
Yes.
how about concerns that are there? I know I asked this the last circle, but what do you see as officers we can do to make your job better, and to address some of these issues that we've been talking about? And I'll ask Officer Rogers to respond.
The main thing that I see, we ride around our areas a lot throughout the day. Of course, a lot of times we're going call to call, but when we do have downtime, a lot of us, we do get out and speak just with the community within our areas, and we ask them if they have any concerns or anything within the area. And a lot of times we get no, we don't have anything to talk to you about. Well, then something happens in that area. Well, then they start asking questions, why are you guys not doing anything about this? Well, I feel like when we're asking, is there any concerns, if someone would express that there are concerns in the area, then maybe we can start being more proactive rather than reactive to the situations.
So I'm sharing more information. And what about Officer Reed? What are your thoughts?
Can you guys hear me? I've been having piggybacking off what Officer Rogers said, I would believe that if the community were to share more information about what's going on, just like in their neighborhood, that'd be helpful. Because, like you said, when I have time, I do try to speak and ask them, hey, what's the issue going on? Have you had any issues with homeless people or anybody like that in the area, or just people hanging out? And they're like, no, we're not having any issues. But finally, when you do get that call, they're like, hey, we've been calling you guys over and over again about this issue. But when you go to speak to them, they don't want to give you the information about that. So just picking up from what Officer Rogers said, if people would be more open to giving information, that can help us to help you all.
And asking why do you think people are unwilling to share information with our police officers?
We got history. History. I mean, it's explanatory. I don't. Sometimes when you're asking questions here, we should know the answer. It's self-explanatory. You have beat down people for 400 years, and I'm not talking all African Americans. There's a reason for that, and we keep overlooking it. We keep the narrative. We have a systemic problem that we don't address. Now, JSO keep talking. I'm not talking about these new officers. If the history of JSO, never for them to the community and apologize for what they've done. They have put people into jail They continue to put people in jail for little minor stuff. But records say, jail information show that could arrest, criminal arrest, very low. Why is that case? But citizen, low income class citizens and case are being put in jail. It causes problems. Because a lot of times these people don't have money. JSO take advantage of it. Talk to them sometimes because I meet with them all the time. JSO, City of Jacksonville, and a lot of time when we come on these lines here, we assume that all of us in bad, well, not all of us, a lot of African Americans in bad condition, or we poor, or whatever the situation is. That's not true. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I call JSO, treat me like a criminal. With all the accolades I have, they treat me like a criminal. Now, do I have a bad feeling toward JSO? No. I would JSO. But you have a problem that you are in denial about, that you mistreat.
You're going in and out, Mr. Scott. I think we've lost you there. But it sounded like he was saying that there's a history of let's call it racism, inappropriate responses, to say the least. And I think everybody's aware of that, of the past. What we're trying to do in this small little circle is to think of ways that we as individuals could improve the situation and listen to one another. I've heard some really great suggestions.
Excuse me a second, I do with you. I agree with you about moving forward. I agree with that. But sometimes you have to go back to just situation that you have to positive change. You have never apologized to the African community for the injustice. But how do you think we supposed to turn up, wake up one morning and feel good about everything? And I'm not having a problem with JSO. I'm talking from the community. Well,
thank you. Other areas that we might explore. I have a comment here from Ms. Wainwright. Good conversation need to continue and include seniors and youth. That sounds like a great idea. We actually had, just to share one of our experiences, one of our circles was with seniors, and they were so willing to tell the officers what they felt that I got the impression the officers were glad the thing was over, were ready to run, because the seniors were really tough on them. And I think that's a good idea. We also have had it with youth, and will we continue to do that? I said earlier in the program, we've done a lot of youth crime prevention engagement with the JSO and other people in the justice system. And I see she also mentions eye care. So other thoughts that we might explore together tonight.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. I heard what the officers were saying, and I understand their disconnect from the community. One thing they can do is when they get the call, I understand that they can be very dangerous calls. They can be very heated, but when they get to the scene, the people making the calls are usually treated pretty badly, like Doc Scott is saying. And I'm a Black female. I'm very hesitant to interact with the police now because of all the negative things we've seen. And so when they came to my home, someone called them, random call, I guess, and they came in my house, and I had to get someone on another call to acknowledge that I had officers standing around me in my office. I think the officers, I had an encounter with the officers on the side of the road. They escalated everything. They need to de-escalate situations when it does not call for this violence that we see. They escalated everything, and they wanted me to allocute on the side of the road. And frankly, I wasn't having it. And I called for the sergeant. The sergeant came, and he wanted me to say I had committed a crime, which I did not. And I just said, "Oh, you could write me a ticket, I could go home." Those officers escalated that, and I see that all the time. So that makes us not want to interact with them. I would like to see them get out the cars and talk to the community and have a conversation that's not when everything is so heated, when we're in a tense moment, or when something is negative is going on. But they used to come out when we would have picnics. Our zone officers would show up. They need to get out the cars and really meet the community and start interacting with the people who live in those homes.
It's interesting you should bring that up because we're just in the process of planning some cookouts. We're actually looking at a spot on Kings Road where we have some property, Kings Road in Myrtle, and to have a barbecue and to get the community out. And
great area. I live over here. Great area. Great choice.
Okay, all right.
I have a question for the officers.
Go ahead, Jamie.
So Ms. Franklin is mentioning community engagement and fostering that relationship. Is that in designated when you clock in, is that a designated time frame, I guess, that you are supposed to foster community engagement, or is that something that you almost have to dedicate extra time to that you're not paid for?
How about Officer Ferrari?
Hello. So, we would like to engage with the community more than we have the allotted time, but obviously for us, the number one thing that comes priority for us is calls for service, because that is someone in the community that's calling for us to come help them with whatever issue that they have. So we would like to be able to get this community engagement in more, but everything that we do has to work around calls for service. And where we're at right now, we don't have a whole lot of extra time when we're working. We barely get enough time to sit down and have a sandwich as is right now. But we would like to get out and interact with the community a little bit more. It's just we would have to use our own time to be able to get out here and interact with the community as much as the community and us would like to do. It's just with the way that it is right now, it's just hard for us to find that allotted time in order to get out there and engage in, like they were saying, in a social, not a we're here to handle the law. It's hard for us to get out and to just speak with citizen to citizen.
So, Officer Lestrange, or Lieutenant Lestrange, if we had some way to pass that up the chain to have a dialogue on getting more time in the system for engagement, would that be something we could do?
Absolutely. I think it's a great idea.
Great, thank you. Any other ideas for engagement?
Yes, you got to get the police officer to live in the community. You got too many of them living in Nassau, St. John. That's a lot of officers. Why they are not living in communities? That's my concern.
Question. That's a good comment. People living in the community. Are officers still allowed to bring their cars to their homes? Is that still allowed?
Yes.
I mean, I always thought that was a great idea because you're letting people know that they're in the community and there to help. Is there a requirement that you live within Duval County?
No, but if you live out of county, you do have to pay, for use of the gas and the wear and tear on the car.
I see. Now, this is another one where I suppose we could get the data on it, how many actually live outside the county, and it might be something worth looking at.
Yes, sir.
So that's another takeaway.
Hey, Dennis, if I could interrupt just for a moment, this is Abdul Hai.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to say very quickly, I was at the sheriff's meeting earlier in the week, and statistically, it's about 1 in 3 live outside of the county.
Wow.
If I'm not mistaken, maybe it's 33% of officers live outside of the county. That's lieutenants, sheriff, officers, so on and so forth.
That is correct.
And that's probably true of people that work in Jacksonville generally. And that people that can afford to move outside the county, leaving people left in the county who, have to struggle to make a paycheck or get by. So, and that's something we all as a community have to be aware of.
True. True. Not true. Don't put that. That is not true. Don't put that.
I can't understand what
Don't mislead people. That's true.
Whatever you're using as a device, Mr. Scott, it's not working very well.
Whatever you use, it's not working.
Okay.
You keep coming in and out, and it's hard to understand.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, maybe if you speak a little less, maybe more slowly might help.
Okay.
Maybe slowly.
Yes. I want to make sure we understand that's not a true information. There's quite a few, especially African Americans, make a lot of money here in Jacksonville, right here in Jacksonville. And when it comes to Jacksonville, especially on the south side here, you have people making almost $100,000 to $200,000 a year. So it has nothing to do with what area you live in. That's not a true statement. Numbers.
Okay. So living outside the community, training and making sure that we continue to develop training in mental health, engaging with the community, finding out if there are ways that we can allow officers more time to get engaged with the community. I know we had a couple of speakers from New Orleans that have gone through an initiative like that, and they're actually doing it again because crime has gone up in New Orleans, and they're working on the problem, and they're trying to get more community engaged with law enforcement and vice versa. Other ideas that would be helpful in our community, and what could be used to better community relations. Other thoughts?
I know you guys go through a lot of training. Is one of those trainings implicit bias training?
If you're referencing what was in the paper, no, it's not specifically called that. We go through what we call bias-based profiling and discrimination, but not implicit. But I know the term. I know what you're talking about.
And do you think that the bias-based training covers enough education related to implicit bias? If you don't call it that, does it include that curriculum, or could you gain the skills from that training to deal with implicit bias?
I think we do gain the necessary skills. Now, whether or not a police officer actually uses those skills, that's up to the individual officer, but we are trained, and there is a heavy emphasis placed on what we would call bias-based profiling and discrimination.
We saw some statistical data that said African Americans make up 29% of the population, but you arrest more African Americans than anyone. How successful is your training if they're not putting it to use?
Well, that's a good question. So we are arresting more people of a certain race and or color than we should be.
Correct. And what can we do to change that if, and I think that what I understand you to say, it's a part of the training for every officer that they get implicit bias training, but we're still getting high numbers of African Americans being arrested. And how do we change that behavior?
How do we change whose behavior?
The officers who are focusing in on African Americans.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
My question was, when you do training, if training is successful, then people are able to take what they learn out the book and put it in application. So there's a disconnect between the training and what the officers are exhibiting. How do we change that behavior so that they take the training and apply it in everyday to-day situations?
Well, I think forums like these help go a long way, combining real life interactions and learning about problems, coupling that with training and putting that out on the street.
Thank you.
Just shifting the topic a little bit, we do have this election coming up for a new sheriff. And I know that there have been some changes and promotions that took place recently because of you do have a new interim sheriff. I wonder, since for a lot of us, we're not as aware of what's going on inside the JSO, and we should know more. What can you share with us in terms of things that you see as being potential change going forward with a new person coming on board? And I don't mean to get political. In other words, maybe some of the candidates are saying they'll do X and Y, but what do you see the opportunities are for change going forward? And I don't want to put Lieutenant Lestrange on the spot all the time, so let's talk, Officer Reed. What do you see are possible things that could come along that with a new person, a new sheriff in town?
To be honest, right now, that's a difficult question for me to answer because I have not been on that long. Like I said, I've been on for like 4 months. But I know prior to this, I was a CSO for Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. And we already, like, from what my experience was then, from when I started till when I switched over to police, there was a major change while I was a CSO in a very positive way. But as of right now, I cannot answer that question like 100% due to me just being a police officer just now for 4 months.
Are you from Jacksonville originally?
No, sir. I'm from Portsmouth, Virginia.
Ah, what brought you down here?
Military.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome and thank you for your service.
Thank
Not
you.
only your current service, but your previous service. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Officer Ferrari, any thoughts on what you see as potential change?
I'm kind of on the same wavelength as Officer Reed. I can't speak on what changes I see coming forward right now, just based on, I don't know which candidate is. I mean, it all depends on what candidate is ultimately accepted by the community. So it all depends on whoever comes in. I can't say for sure what changes I can see coming or not.
So there is one thing you have said though, is that there could be significant change depending on, and it would go in the direction of whatever the new sheriff was, but there's an opportunity to see significant change.
There is the opportunity to see change. Yes, I mean, whenever you have an election, regardless of what office is being taken, you're going to see that change. You have the opportunity to see change, and it all depends on who is chosen.
That's telling us a lot, because being an insider, oftentimes you're in an organization where you know nothing's going to change. It's going to stay this way, period. But you tell us that there is hope, that, and it's always good to see change, because if you don't get uncomfortable with change, you're not going to grow. And so there's an opportunity to grow and develop, and that's good news. Let's hope that we were able to get somebody in that can address some of the issues that we've discussed tonight. And Officer Kuka, what are your observations about the future of change relative to a new sheriff?
Well, I'd say it's for sure there will be change with anyone new. You've only been out here on the street a couple months here. I've already seen, just through the grapevine and just from hearing from more veteran officers and from more administrative, that there are programs in place of where they're increasing officers and more of a community engagement method, such as having more bicycle units and more people on foot and out of cars. So there actually is a push, and depending on who is elected sheriff, they might increase that even more so, and develop those programs. I'd say it's difficult for us. We can't speak to. It would be unprofessional to speak to any individual person that we would want elected. But I'd say that everyone should go out and vote, and I think that is important. And unfortunately, it is a low percentage on some voting outcomes. But I think having more people go out, make their voices heard, kind of goes back to that earlier point about what we want from the community to help us, and I think that would be something that could help us out.
Thank you. Any other thoughts about before we close on the future of our community relative to the JSO and a new sheriff? Anything? All right. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for being here on behalf of the Urban League, and I particularly wanted to thank the officers who came tonight and listened and shared their thoughts. I want to thank Jamie for all the work she did to help put this together, and also Jesse McCarter and the other interns that worked on this to make it possible. Thank you so much, and we look forward to other engagements like this, hopefully over some ribs or other nutritious food, and make it a good gathering. So thank you so much.